Good morning, everybody. I hope you're doing well, being slowly but surely and further released from the lockdown. Thanks for joining in. This is our fifth webinar from the 3if series again in this period of March through June, which will continue to support digital transformation for our manufacturing companies in the first place, but also taking it a little bit from a wider perspective, especially also today. So my name is Ulrich Salzstachts. I'm the managing director for the association called LSEC, where we organize activities under the brand name of 3if as well, and where 3if basically has to do with everything in relation to our digital manufacturing transitions. So we support companies, manufacturing companies, logistics, companies producing digital goods in making that transformation happen. Providing them with advice, guidance, and we do that also with the support from, in this case, the Flemish government. So it's a partially funded activity where we see that there's a lot of interest coming in from manufacturing companies in trying to understand how they need to do that, but also companies manufacturing products that need to be digitized. So for that, today we will be talking a little bit more on those two challenges. The digital transformation within the production environment in itself, but also how to digitize products. So putting that a little bit into context, how we see that today is a lot, has to do, of course, with the concept of Internet of Things. And we focus it today slightly a little bit more towards industrial Internet of Things. Industrial Internet of Things basically, and in a large extent, are simply devices which will be connected to the internet, which therefore carry some form of internet protocol and do activities that need to support the industrial environment. Industrial environment can be taken a bit wider. So it could also be an enterprise, of course. But in this case, for instance, like here in the example, connected cars, connected houses, which will be supplied by industrial IoT devices. Taking that a little bit further and making really the difference between one and the other. So where do we see the difference between the real IoT as we know it in terms of the surveillance cameras that we might have from our homes, the Nest cameras or something of a kind, or even connected watches versus the things that we see in an industrial context, sensors, actuators in a production environment, or also from machines to learn how they are acting in such an environment. So I'd say in many cases, we see that there's a bit of transformation happening from both the OT side, the operational technology side, as well as from the IT side. And that's also, of course, has an impact in the concept of industrial IoT. And that's specifically, in our case, in the domain and in the consideration of security. And which is also one of the topics that we'll be talking about today, because security is a big challenge in this domain. But putting it maybe firstly in the wider perspective of how transformation is happening in the back end of manufacturing companies. So sensors, internet gateways are the things that we're seeing popping up, usually within the premise of the enterprise, of the factory in this case. And then there's edge IT devices which are being connected sometimes in parts of the manufacturing process or even the logistics process taking place not within the factory premise, but maybe outside. And then some of the data that's being gathered is sent into a cloud environment. So those considerations are things that we need to take into account when doing this digital transformation going forward. So one of the challenges, as I already mentioned, is really the security of those devices. Today, we do see that 32% of the IoT devices connect directly to the internet. And so we see actually that this, because this was a survey from SANS in 2018, this has risen up to about 50 and over 60% in some cases, as we've seen lately in many of the environments that we encounter. So taking this into the perspective of how is it being managed from an industrial domain, where usually devices are being segmented according to the Purdue model, the ISA 99 or IEC 62443 cybersecurity framework model. So putting in different layers, segmenting the different activities within an enterprise, within a manufacturing environment, and then splitting up these functions and activities quite clearly. Now, in an industrial IoT and in an Industry 4.0 domain, that changes quite significantly because all of these segments will need to interact with each other, either going out into the cloud or maybe having a private cloud where this would happen as well. So this brings to the topic of the day, and that is really how do we manage all of these specific devices. So how do we know that all of the devices that are within the remit of our enterprise environments can also be handled. So we do this also from a larger perspective. So on the one hand side, there's the activities that we do in Flanders supporting these transformations, but also from a European perspective, we see this happening. We call this basically from the connected factories activities that we are executing and performing. We call these different pathways, and pathways having multiple cross-cutting factors. So as an example, what we see is for an industry, the pathway of collaborative product services, which means that new products are being developed and designed with included already the concept of connected enterprises and connected devices. So how do we, going forward, manage those devices that we produce in a proper way? And that's, of course, one of the relations to the topics of today. Again, when we do it within the factory, for instance, the concept of autonomous smart factories, where the robots can take over when we are going back into lockdown, and where we see now many factories that are preparing themselves to be resilient and to be ready for the next lockdown, maybe in the fall, maybe afterwards, where some, at least, of the activities can continue without the human intervention. So on our side, we have a platform that we developed, which is called FactorySense, which is really a combination of those IoT devices with digital platforms, and that we start bringing to the market to support those manufacturing companies making that change. So I'll stop sharing here and taking it maybe one or two steps further and introduce Gerhard from ForgeRock. Gerhard, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm very well. Thank you, Ulrich.
So thanks for joining in. I see that you're also still working from home.
Yeah, these days we get to see lots of living rooms, right?
Yes, we call them either working from home seminars or from the salon. And yes, I have seen many closets over the last couple of weeks. I have seen many interferences by the youngsters knocking on their mother's or father's doors and just trying to get some attention. So thanks for joining in. We've asked you because we know that ForgeRock is quite a strong player in everything in relation to digital identities that we know from our security practices, of course. But I'd say in this case, we definitely also want to know what your views and thoughts are when it comes to identity management of things, and then specifically, of course, in the domain of industry and industrial automation, so the digitization of the industry. So I'll hand over the word to you, maybe to put that a bit more into context.
Yes, great. So you mentioned an important part, disturbance by children, and that raised a thought in me. And that is passwords. I'm sure we are all tired of managing passwords and access to portals where kids got material for homeschooling sent to the parents' emails address, to the kids' emails address, and getting all this done. And in fact, it's great that we are talking here today, and allow me 5 minutes to talk about what we announced yesterday. And in fact, for those interested, I invite everyone. There is another ForgeRock Identity Live virtual session this afternoon, Central European time, and you can still register for it on forgerock.com/identitylive. What we have announced yesterday and what we are going to announce and outline in more detail this afternoon is three things. The first one is ForgeRock Go. And ForgeRock Go is actually a technology that, based on WebAuthn and FIDO, allows people to get rid of passwords and usernames. And you know, these things are more secure, and I guess we all are tired of remembering a gazillion passwords. So that's one technology we announced. The other one is autonomous identity. That's a technology more for workforce identity, and it automates to a large degree using artificial intelligence and machine learning the roles and the segregation of duty that is required in companies. And the third one is we've strengthened our cloud offering. So if you want to know more, please join us this afternoon. And maybe a few words, let me share a screen here, a few words about ForgeRock. So
that's a whole lot of slides.
Yeah, so now to do.
Yep.
Does it make sense what you see? Great. Okay. So let's dive right into it. Just imagine you're in a world where you can control every aspect of your factory, as Ulrich outlined. I hope we don't have to go back into a lockdown, but if it happens, you know, we all want to be prepared for it. And imagine you have full visibility of your fleet, of your trucks. Trucks pay road toll automatically. Operators of heavy construction equipment that are required to do pre-start checks every morning before they operate that big machinery have basically, you know, logs in the machine because the machine is connected and has traceable behavior. And I don't just mean the equipment in itself. We seem to be talking a lot about Internet of Things, but I think, and I've been in this business for a long time, all the way back since it was called M2M. And M2M was not a good term because it meant machines talk to machines. Personally, I think IoT is also too short because we really need to digitize the entire business process. When you digitize the entire business process, you have more than machines and robots. You have human actors, you have services, you may have bots, you may have all kinds of things. And if you want to automate that process, you need to have an understanding what is out there. And that's really identity and access management. And I understand the audience here is very much focused on the manufacturing space and on factory automation. There is one thing that I think OT can learn from IT, and that's identity and access management. That's a well-proven technology to have lots of, you know, actors with different rights and responsibilities, identify them uniquely, and manage them, you know, through the life cycle of onboarding and departing. There's many things that you cannot simply transform from OT into IT and from IT into OT. And Ulrich, I did like your slide where you had this industrial IoT in the middle. That's a combination of IT and OT. And so this brings me to what we do as a company. We are let me browse through that quickly. So we are a digital identity and access management company, about 10 years old, with more than 1,000 customers, some big prominent names as on our customer list, big manufacturing companies, but also insurance companies like Allianz, or banks as HSBC, even, you know, government institutions. And we, in simple words, we help people to safely and simply access the connected world and their things. And if we move on to the next slide, we can see that this is our platform. We have identity management, access management, the governance module that is more geared towards the workforce identity, and the universal directory. And when you look off to the left on your slide, you see workforce, customers, and things. And this is really what differentiates us from many other players in the identity and access management space. We were fortunate enough that our founders over 10 years ago already had the vision of identity is more than single logon for an enterprise, for the employees of an enterprise. And that, you know, gives us now the capability to have devices as first-class citizens, you know, even services, microservices, bots with a unique identity. And yeah, stuff is complicated for IT as it is, but there is a lot of devices out there. And I don't remember where I read that study, but there is about, you know, between 2/3 and 3/4 of the company may have a policy for device security. But less than half of those that have a policy don't enforce it because they don't have the means to do it. And in IoT, we have seen many things that you know, were functionality first. I call it functionality first because people look at data, look at an algorithm, and say, yeah, I can bring value by analyzing the data with that algorithm, be it predictive maintenance, be it whatever it is. But you know, scalability and security and manageability are neglected, and that is going to come and haunt you when your platform is successful. Oops, what happened? Can you still see the slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So what's driving this, and why am I saying we need to look into all the actors? The market is moving towards services. People don't want a one-size-fits-all product anymore. They want a product that is serving exactly their needs when they need it at exactly the point in time and location where they need it. And a perfect example out of the consumer industry would be the music industry. Who would have thought 10, 15 years ago that CDs will completely disappear and music as a service will basically rule the world? Now, today, few people think pressurized air or welding as a service will rule the world, but we are in the middle of that change. But you know, that requires sensors, connected machines, and people in the equation. And if you look at an enterprise today, and most businesses are organized that way, you see a simplified example here. You know, there is different departments, and data are kept according to organizational boundaries in many companies. And that means you have data in silos. And when you have, you know, you see the IoT silos here at the bottom that are individual point solutions. If you want to make use of them for your complete business process and automate that process, then you need to have access to all this data. And I'll come to a minute what our vision is for that. The other thing that I wanted to mention here is the market for security in enterprise security for people accessing things is somewhere between 5 and 10 billion. The machine identities already outnumber the people identities today, or the number of connected machines and sensors and equipment. But I couldn't even find how big that market is. It's you know, it's underspent, under-researched, and it's a complex beast. You know, device diversity will increase over time. More and more OT devices will come onto the network, And as an enterprise, you should kind of have an understanding of what you have on your network. And digital identity is going to help you solve that challenge. Now, digital identities are not, the single security solution for IoT. And I borrowed this slide from Gartner. It's actually by now must be about 2 years old, but even then already Gartner recognized that a proper identity and access management is a very important ingredient to securing your IoT place overall. You see the others here. A little bit of a look into, what the typical identity and access management platform in a company looks like. And historically, that has come to play as a single logon for employees accessing applications in the data center. Today, the world is more complex. You have people working all over. You have a lot of devices connected. In this case here, you see a car and other equipment there. You have partners. You have things moving around, but they all are important for your decision-making process. And on top of it, your data center is not a room or a closet on campus. It's most likely multiple clouds. The vast majority of companies with more than 1,000 employees have a multi-cloud strategy today. So in order to cope with the situation on the right-hand side, you need a flexible platform. One, for example, from the one that we offer from ForgeRock. Now, the challenge is if you do all these IoT plays at scale is you need to automate it and you need to be able to scale it. You need to be able to secure it. And also it should be kind of future-proof. And let me substantiate what I mean with that and what you need to look for when you implement that in your enterprise. First of all, automated scale. You need a scalable system to do that. That goes, if you use identity and access management, way beyond of employee scale. There's many platforms out there that connect devices to an IoT platform, whether this is Microsoft or AWS or any other platform. But they only connect devices to the cloud. They neglect the other portion of actors in the process. And so we feel ultimately there needs to be every identity, every actor that plays a role in that process needs to be in one repository, and data from all these need to be utilized for the decision-making process. Security, we already talked about it. There's lots of devices out there. You need to keep them secure. In order to keep them secure, you need to be able to identify them. Only if you can clearly identify them, you can then also understand what configuration that device has and, if necessary, update it. But you also have, privacy and consent requirements. As soon as you have individuals accessing the data, doing stuff with the devices, some of the data may be personalized. So you need to be able to manage privacy and consent. And you would like to have fine-grained authorization of who can do what, because that allows you to categorize data clearly. The data that need to be personalized and only the minimum that needs to be personalized data can be categorized as that. Everything else is anonymized or machine data that you can easily distribute, access, store, whatever. And then future-proof. What do I mean with that? You need to have a platform that's open and that's scalable. And in many cases, IoT goes beyond your own enterprise. Think of a smart city, or Ulrich showed a slide, smart buildings, office buildings, campuses, mobility concepts where you have a car, drive it to the city border, and then have public transportation offerings. All these applications have different actors. And if we go into the factory, the same can be true. Let me give the example of a robot building cars, for example. If the company that makes cars has robots deployed, of course, they'd like to understand if they are operational, and they, of course, need to understand how many cars are produced and which cars. Now, the robot manufacturer may have a contract to guarantee uptime and also needs to understand certain amounts of data and certain signals from the robot. And the robot head may come from, and typically comes from another company or has material and equipment from another company. Let's say it's a robot that paints cars, and the robot head manufacturer also has guaranteed, quality levels, uptime levels. So there is already 3 players in this simple example on a single robot, and everyone needs to have access to his own set of data. You can either put 3 gateways in, which is, kind of not practical, even though I've seen people doing it, or you deploy a system that's capable of doing that. And, I will come to that example back a little bit later on showing how we do that. So that different actors can have access to different sets of data. Now, coming back to this enterprise example, what our vision is that enterprises that want to have a successful digital transformation need to migrate over time and have a vision of one digital identity and access management repository for the entire enterprise that can span and should span from the consumer customer portal to workforce to the, if you are in a regulated market and you need to have track and trace applications for manufacturing, includes that. Also leverage the repair and warranty department and returns department. I've seen that these systems often are not even legacy, but old legacy, completely detached from all the other systems. That all makes it difficult to understand the significance of a customer, of a transaction. And only when you have that complete view, you can make a meaningful decision. And when you have all the data, every process can become a standard process. You have a lot less exceptions to manage, because if you have a complete view and you understand this is a very important customer, I can be more generous on a repair or on a warranty case than when this is a customer that only bought one product once in a while. You also see to the left and to the right of that golden bar at the bottom, standards and APIs, and that's important for 2 reasons. One is legacy. There is, of course, a lot of legacy applications and tools and things in an enterprise that you don't want to get rid of, that you can't get rid of. And so such a platform needs to be able to connect to all of these. But as mentioned earlier, many of the IoT plays go beyond just one enterprise. And so if you have standards and APIs that allow you to interface easily also with others, or maybe even through federation, then you can play in the ecosystem. Here, this is a connected car example from, sensors and systems within the car that are only accessible by the car manufacturer, to services that the driver is using, all the way to, the car being able to share information within a smart city or within a campus of, the car is now here, it needs a parking spot. Maybe there is context and location-based advertising. So you get the idea, and this is just one example of many. So how do we do that before I come to the use case examples? And this is the ForgeRock IoT offering. And what we bring to the party is really all related to device management. We are not doing analytics. We are not providing a data lake. We are not providing an IoT marketplace. But if we start to the right with the block integration, we can integrate with Azure, with AWS, with Google IoT, and potentially many, many more. But for those 3, we have how-to documentation available on our Backstage portal that's available to customers and also qualified prospects that tell you exactly how our identity and access management can integrate very well with these marketplaces and complement them. And since we started on the right-hand side of the slide, let's move to IoT Edge. the IoT Edge offering that we have is one that gives you some autonomy at the edge, in particular when it comes to offline use cases. In many use cases and in many IoT scenarios, you are not connected all the time. But how you behave on offline is something that needs to be well defined and then also programmed. And our IoT Edge capability sits, is an agent that sits in the gateway or in the edge computer and allows you to do that. You can envision that almost like a subsystem of identities at the edge, of multiple identities that can function based on a determined policy, even when not connected to the rest of the world. The other two things, authentication and authorization. Now, to authenticate and identify a device is something that other people do as well, and maybe they connect securely to the cloud, and we can do that based on just about any credential. If the device has a credential, an X509 certificate, hardware key, whatever it is, could even be file-based. We can uniquely identify it and give it a unique identity. Then we manage everything with tokens that can have different lifetime, short-lived, long-lived, whatever. And that allows the device to have certain capabilities. It's authorized to do things on its own behalf. It really becomes a first-class citizen of devices. That can be many things. It can, that can be a truck that pays road toll automatically independent of where the driver is. It can send alerts when it gets outside of a geofence if the truck is supposed to take a certain route. But that is also the same policy that is used, for a robot to send different information to the different stakeholders. And that our digital identities for devices basically extend the full power of the ForgeRock platform of a very modern and scalable identity and access management system to devices and things. So this gives an overview, the consent, context, lifecycle management, as I mentioned already, fine-grained authorization, the relationship. That's an important point that I didn't touch yet. In order to understand, who is doing what, and is that belonging to one customer or multiple customers, it's important to understand the relationship. So is that person the operator of the equipment? Is it the owner of the equipment? Different roles, almost like you have different roles within the employees of an organization. You not only have a flat list of devices, they can have relationships to human actors, but also to other non-human actors. And at the bottom, digital twin, that's a bold word. So I wouldn't say we have a full-blown digital twin. Let's call it an identity twin. But what we do is once the device is connected, we understand, what's the latest software image that's on the device, where does it sit, basically, device health and context data. And that then is in the database, like all the identities are, and you can, of course, sort them, group them, select a certain subset for updates over the air, and anything related to life cycle and updates, and many more things. What's coming with version 7 that will ship as of next month is we can have zero-touch onboarding of any device, either through an edge gateway or directly with our backend. And we have now one unified, that used to be slightly different SDKs, but as of version 7, we now have one SDK for smart devices, constrained devices, gateways, edge computing, and we can, with that one tool, securely onboard devices and make it understand tokens, and then not only have it securely onboarded, but also give it authorization capabilities. Also switch it off when it has been manipulated with. Just very quickly, I'm not going to go into this detail, but those that have ever touched the ForgeRock platform, this is the authentication trees for smart authentication that we use. In this case, shown with an X509 certificate as a root credential for a device. And basically, how you handle non-human identities now is exactly identical with how you handle human identities. So if the IT department needs to manage devices, they can do that from a single console, from a single place, and understand where all the devices are. Now, that's only on the device management side. Whoever is the beneficiary of the payload of the data that the device sends, that can be completely separated from the device management and used by individual business owners within the enterprise.
Gerhard?
Yes.
Thanks for sharing all of this. In this relation, are you familiar with the Industry 4.0 concept of the administrative asset shell?
Not in glorious detail. I have looked at it briefly, but not in glorious detail. Yeah.
So then I'll leave it with this, but I think that's an interesting topic to dive into maybe together in the next couple of weeks, because I think this is something which is definitely very combinationable, but it requires some effort in making it work. So I just wanted to know, because we do have a couple of activities where we are trying to integrate the concepts and the standards of RAMI. So the reference architecture for Industry 4.0, which was developed by the platform Industry 4.0 in Germany. So, but this is very much aligned in that space. So I think ForgeRock could be playing a major role in that space.
Yeah, I will be surprised if we can't, because we have many prospects we talk to and customers that are in process of implementing, and I'm sure they are much closer to this than we are. Okay.
I just wanted to see if it was already, but okay, let's pick it up. So sorry for intruding.
No problem. So let's move on before we go into the examples. Since we are here in with an audience that's not the classic CISO IT audience, I wanted to share this vision, and this is not our vision. This is one of our key customers' vision, and that's really having one identity and access management. Let me build the slide. Repository, one single source of truth for identity and access management, basically being an as a service offering to the business owners within the enterprise. And that can be business owners for IT applications, but they can also be business owners for equipment, for non-human identities, for connected equipment, smart equipment that they sell. Actually, they make moving objects that can be connected, and people can sit in and drive around. And so this is very much our vision, but it's also our customer's vision. And if you have not just a flat file, because that's not manageable, but if you have the authorization capabilities for all types of identities, now all of a sudden you can tap into every piece of information, and everyone in the every identity, according to what it's entitled to, can access information from all the other groups. And then of course it can be shared through standards and APIs with other entities as well. I'm not going to go very much into this. If whoever is interested in identity and access management, there is a research company called Cole. They have written a great white paper on identity fabrics and how modern identity and access management should look like. This is basically our platform mapped into their vision. At the bottom, you have all the capabilities to connect to legacy And legacy in this case can be different things. It can be a mainframe that still exists in, in banks, for example, or other enterprises. But there can also be legacy in terms of, dated factory equipment that needs to be connected through a gateway. So you can access information from those devices that are not meant to be connected through a secure gateway. And then on the top, you have, all the future stuff, cloud services that you take in. So basically outside in, and then all the outreach for new digital services and actors, human and non-human actors, basically from the outside into the platform. So many industrial IoT architectures look like this, and I probably should have put, instead of a car, I should have put a robot or an oil platform or a pumping station or mining or a smart building. It really doesn't matter that much. But for this example, we have a car here, and that's how it typically looks like. The equipment sends data in MQTT or some other format into a message broker and then goes into a cloud. Whoever has access to the cloud pretty much sees what's coming from that device, unless you have, multiple gateways installed. Normally you see pretty much what's there. If you introduce the ForgeRock capabilities to IoT, what you get is basically this capability. Now you can have multiple identities. I wouldn't say an infinite, that's a big word, but and there is no real limit to real life applications on how many identities you can have there out on the subsystem. They can either be connected through an edge computer with our SDK in it, or directly. And we have a proprietary link to that. And we work with message broker companies, whether it's HiveMQ, RabbitMQ, and others, to make them understand our OAuth tokens. And now we can make sure that the payload is, also managed the same way the identities are managed. So we use the tokens to manage the access. And now only people that, or other non-human actors, as shown here, can have access to only the data in the IoT cloud that they're entitled to, and it becomes a closed loop system, so to speak. You know exactly the device, the data coming from the device you think they're coming from, because each device identity is unique, cannot be form fit function replaced, because it's linked to either a hardware key or a certificate or other means of clearly uniquely identifying that piece of hardware or that bot or that software. And the payload is managed the same way. And this is a bit more also to manufacturing. The sources and the data sources and the data sinks on the edge or in the device can be a variety of things. That can be simple sensors, that can be industrial protocol data streams, that can be computers in itself, whatever it is. Yeah, and I mentioned it earlier. We can integrate with all the well-known IoT platforms, and probably many more, as most of the more vertically integrated IoT marketplaces also run on one of these cloud platforms. And I lost count, but there must be about 400 or 500 IoT platforms out there of various incarnations. And we have yet to find one we can't work with. Sometimes it's a bit more cumbersome, sometimes it's straightforward, but we can integrate with all those. And as I mentioned earlier, we coexist with those because they bring value when it comes to analyzing the data, analytics engines and things like that we don't offer. Coming to closure here, we are all for maximizing the business value. Now, there is certainly some benefit if you have 10 robots talking to each other in a factory and teach each other how to be more productive. But that's only part of a process. And we think the real value and the economic value of a process increases when it's digitized end to end. And people say whatever can be digitized will be digitized, and I've yet to find a process that cannot be digitized. So it's this is like you are with a friend of yours in in a forest, and the bear comes and hunts you. You don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to be faster than the other guy. And this is also a little bit the competitive situation here. The sooner you move, the sooner you will be having a differentiated offering in the marketplace. So in summary, overall, migrating to a single source of truth for identity and access management in the enterprise, keeps you on the winning street and not, it's the question of disrupting the market or being disrupted. So, that empowers you to disrupt. Ultimately, in the environment you're in, it will reduce cost. Yes, there is some cost initially to do it right, but overall, it's much more efficient if you have a well thought out platform strategy that meets the capabilities that you face today and tomorrow. It gives you a competitive advantage because you have a differentiated offering that others struggle to meet. Increases your productivity, increases also the happiness of employees because they benefit of the same capabilities that you offer to your customers, and ultimately also improves security. Yeah, and now I would be open for questions.
Great. Well, thank you very much. In any case, Gerhard, it was quite insightful and definitely worthwhile in considering for an industrial environment. That's definitely one of the things that we are searching for in this case. How can the industrial architecture being enabled, if you like, for the specifics of the new identities of things. So in this case, there's a couple of questions that come into my mind because what we do see is we take it very much from an information technology perspective. However, in the operational world, the typical challenge that we see, people are not really much involved into information communication technology processes. So they like to see simply things work. Of course, in the IT, we do that too, but we're accepting that sometimes the system fails and that it sometimes requires a bit of more challenge to manage. In the industrial environment, it has to operate. It has to operate for 30, 40 years plus. So in this context, how do you see, let's say, also the evolution of an identity moving forward? Because, I mean, you can assign an identity to a machine. You can also manage it over time. You can put some policies against it and so forth. But doing that for a period of 30 years, it hasn't been done that often before. So how should we consider this, and how do we cope with this, also knowing that systems change in the back end, back office is changing also in the course of 2 to 3 years. So we have a different speed in IT than in OT.
I agree, and we thought about this quite a bit. First of all, the SDK is open source. So whatever goes into the device, the customer or the gateway manufacturer can harden it itself. And this is important for a variety of reasons. First of all, you have regulated markets. Think of rail transportation, think of avionics. Those are more the extreme ones, but also think of healthcare. there is many markets, even automotive, people that make things that can harm people's lives have a completely different approach to safety and security than an IT company typically does. I come from that market, so I understand that. And so that's why we open sourced it, so people can look at it, harden it, implement it. We are also thinking of ways to even get completely rid of an agent and being able to manage identities for devices as they are. There's of course limitations on the security side, but we want, over time, we'll like to give people that choice. On the back end, no one knows what happens in 30 years or in 20 years. But yeah, I'm quite confident, because this thing is, first of all, any innovation that happens very much in the data center or in the cloud, so it can be carried forward into the future. It can be extended with new things. If you don't do that, let's say you have an IoT silo, you have the same problem, right? The device gets 30 years old. The cloud, Microsoft Azure may be there or not. It may change over time. Separating identity management from the rest of it and looking at it from, what does it need to do? It's an important aspect. I may not have to do it myself. I can buy it, but it's an important layer. I think it improves that situation, right? And, the device data path is independent from the device management. And the other aspect I'd like to mention is, you can always start with that installation for IoT only. I didn't say you have to do identity and access management as a holistic approach for the company from scratch, from the beginning, from day one on. What I'm saying is, any organization that goes through a digital transformation process should have, a vision first of, what do I want to be? How does my business look like when I'm a digital company? And then, in an agile way, implement step after step and project after project to arrive ultimately at that vision. And if that means putting scalable identity and access management for IoT only, that's perfectly legitimate and okay. But I wouldn't use it as an afterthought and someone throws a few identities at you from an IoT platform, because that certainly is worse in 30 years than using a proper platform.
And then in same consideration, how would we need to go about with all of the different legacy systems? So I think it's about 2 weeks ago, we had an interesting talk from a company based here in Belgium called Landsweeper. They do the detection of devices on corporate and industrial networks. Sometimes in industrial networks that could cause a little bit of harm if you want to do an active search, but just purely passively, you can also identify the devices on a network out there. But so there you discover that there are actually those devices which have this already existence for more than 25, 30 years that they've been operating in a company. Does it make sense actually to add them into such a directory to some extent, and then starting to add different attributes to them? And what do those attributes need to be then?
Well, I think there is legacy, there is state of the art, there is legacy, and there is old legacy, right? The old legacy was never meant to be connected. And those you can probably connect through a gateway. Would you install an agent on such a legacy device or old legacy device? No, you wouldn't, right? You would either connect through a gateway, that also because protocols and everything is different. Or if the device sends data, there is always the option that you accept that the device is connected, it does what it does because you don't want to touch it anymore. And you look at the data it produces, and you segment the database and make use of the payload data and manage that and assign to the data stream that's coming from that device a digital identity. So there is not one size fits all recommendation to that. there is ways to bring the information to bear from old and new devices, absolutely. But you need to look at what the challenge is and what you want to achieve. You can also always say, I want to have a serial number, a unique identity ingrained in hardware on every device. And moving forward, that may very well be a very good solution because it's the most secure solution, right? You can't mess with it. You can absolutely trust the data. But if you only have 5% of your signals and devices of that category and you neglect all the brownfield, that doesn't help your cause either. So bringing brownfield into a digital factory is important, at least from my perspective. And we can help in all ways of doing that. And then there's also those people, right, that put microphones and other sensors next to the old legacy equipment that's not even electronic. And that then becomes a subsystem that's independent from the rest. But also there, if you identify this identity and say it's with this machine, it's in this geolocation, it's associated to that equipment, you can make much better use of the signals that are coming from those sensors that are independent from the machinery than when you just put a microphone and you dump all this, the sound files into a data lake.
Yeah. You mentioned the ideas on the robots. Now the robots are something which is also very interesting to us in this case, because we are trying to get a better hold of the cybersecurity for these industrial robots, which is a bit of a pain. Many of those robots systems themselves that are now entering into the market, they will be somehow connected. Could indeed be through a gateway. Some of them are directly connected, so they are basically IoT robots connecting even to the cloud. I'd say in a robot, and like in many of things that we call cyberphysical systems, what we see too is that there's many different components in there that actually could connect. So if you like, one single entity could have multiple identities. Is that something that could be workable in this context as well? Can you define a series of policies on, for instance, one cyber-physical system, which then relates to many of the identities and components in between?
You can have the identities almost as granular as you want, right? And I've gone a few slides back. You know, whether this is a car, a robot, is it doesn't really matter. You can have multiple identities within one complex equipment. I also like to look at a factory, right? Is the edge one factory cell, or is the edge the entire factory? I guess it depends on what you make and how big it is, but that tells you, behind the edge, you can have multiple identities, and an identity can be a more complex compute system or a simple sensor. But having the authorization capability for the identities also allows you to fine-grained select of who is able to do what from both sides. The device can have a policy of what to send where. And of course, the other side, the human actors or other machines can also have, rights of what they're allowed to do and what not to do. So some of it can be done through authorization, and then you can have as many identities as you want, right? People think initially, yeah, I have put one identity, until they think a little bit more, and then they say, oh, it's beneficial to have this and that separated.
Yeah, and then in a similar context, I think we move towards the management of digital services, which was the other part of this thing, of course. And now that you started talking about the connected car, it becomes obviously that also a good example of how these things could actually develop, because you have indeed one car, multiple drivers. There needs to be access to the car from the car manufacturer, from the services company, everything sort of in between, and that makes this this entity as being a car also quite complex. I think from some earlier use cases that we've seen from some of your colleagues, where basically the customer relationship is becoming also very central in managing all of these things. So how do you manage multiple different identities from one of these devices becomes again a challenge that you need to be able to resolve. So if a company would need to start designing digital services, what do they need to keep in mind when moving towards such an environment? How do they need to architecture the fact that they might have multiple identities?
So it's going to be a long one. So on the car, since you touched on it, there is multiple actors, as you mentioned, and there is also different interests. There is almost a conflict of interest, right? So the driver wants to have a cheap insurance policy and therefore needs to share driving behavior, but maybe that person does only want to do this, when they commute to work every day, but on the weekend they accept an uptick because they don't want to share the data. The driver also does not want the car garage or the car manufacturer to understand where he's driving and how he's driving. The car manufacturer, of course, wants to get certain information about engine health and gearbox to make recommendations for service. Now, in Europe, we have legislation that some of the data, there's the UBD2 port in cars, and the information has to be available to independent repair shops and garages. So, you cannot have your Ferrari only serviced in a Ferrari garage. You also need to be able to go to some other shop, a mom and pop shop that repairs cars, and they have to be able to access the data. That's European law. So now, how do you manage that? As a car manufacturer, you need to forward these things to these independent companies, but you only want to forward what you legally have to, right? Because there's no interest to share more. So that's where that fine-grained capability comes into play, and there may be other actors, in the car, like navigation systems or the profile roaming from the driver. Right now, you have a virtual car key, and the car owner needs to be able to forward the car key to you. And what we can do with our platform is, you give a car key that only works certain times a day, or for a few hours, or it throttles the top speed. These are all things that you can do with this platform. And today, in some cases, that may be still proprietary, but you don't want to have apps for every car brand. You rent from Hertz, you rent from Avis, you rent a Fiat one day, a Volkswagen the other day, a Renault the other day, and you have 3 car companies and 3 car brands, and you have 9 apps on your phone just for that. So standards is important, and that's why I said earlier, supporting standards, so these entities or these businesses can share information through standard protocols with other businesses is important, because that's when portability increases, and that's when the user really will accept it, right? Initially people will like it, but then they'll say, oh, this is complicated and it needs to be simple, and that increases the acceptance. And you mentioned earlier, how will acceptance go up? Relevance is important. Market studies say if you can make a relevant offering, the loyalty of your customer increases. So if you understand what your customer does, then you can make a relevant offer, and that creates a loyal customer for you. And that's really the name of the game. So you need to get a holistic view on the customer, whether this is a B2B or a B2C, doesn't make a difference. and then you need to have that information in real time. If you have a busy back office that gives you a fantastic dashboard that tells you what happened 3 months ago, if someone needs paper for, to print newspapers, and you find that out 3 months after, you can't sell the paper anymore. So you need to have the information not in real time as real time for a robot to weld, the roof of a car, but in near real time, so you can act to the request and to the opportunity that your B2B or your B2C customer creates for you.
Right, and with those wise words, I'd say we're going to wrap it up. So thank you very much in any case, Gerhard, to share these thoughts and perspectives together with us this morning. So we're actually going to continue on a similar subject, same topic, slightly different in perspective next week, when we're taking this back up into our cybersecurity breakfast seminars in webinars, like we've had already a couple on AI, on the kill chain, on 5G developments. But in this case, it will be on IoT security, together with Udo from Trend Micro. So we'll be talking a little bit more about how to manage the different devices once they are inside a network, and this goes, of course, then beyond the digital identities. So with this, I'd say thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts, Gerhard. I hope to be able to see you again in live and well in the next coming months at one or another LSEC or ForgeRock activity, or maybe somewhere else. So I wish you also very nice holidays and a hot summer. So thanks in any case again for sharing.
Thanks, Ulrich. Yeah, look forward to coming back. Bye-bye.
Right.
Stay healthy and safe.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. And thanks everybody for attending.